now.
Mr. Mayor, I did have a couple of points that I wanted
Sure.
to throw in based on some of the comments that I had heard. In general, I want the council to keep in mind that in dealing with your sign ordinance, which is a quite old document, you are dealing with the most restricted area that for regulation that the council possibly can deal with, because it is a pure First Amendment activity. So your field of regulation is very restricted. And there are a couple of comments that were made this evening that I particularly want to talk about. There have been a number of times when members of the public or the council have talked about particular signs based upon what they are advertising. Real estate signs, for example. And as soon as the council starts discussing regulation based on content of a sign, that is, you must read the sign to determine whether or not it is permitted, we're all going to get in a lot of trouble. Your current sign ordinance has a whole bunch of places where it does that. I prefer not to add any more provisions like that to the extent that you can avoid them. So you want to talk about the size of the sign, or whether it's inflated, or whether it moves, or something like that. That's great, but it really should not talk about what does the sign say, because regulation of content is very, very strictly limited by the First Amendment. The second area that I think was raised this evening that might be problematic for us has to do with what the courts call forum opening. For First Amendment purposes, there are different areas where the First Amendment applies or doesn't apply more or less strictly. So, for example, to take you back to American history, the Sons of Liberty met under some big tree someplace in Boston, and everybody stood on a soapbox and yelled and screamed about whatever it is that they wanted to yell and scream about. There are some fora, like public parks, where you are very limited in what you can regulate, because they're considered public, and they're there in part for that purpose. There are some fora that are completely private. You have absolutely no right to First Amendment activities in the city manager's office. It's a closed forum. It's public in the sense the public owns the office, but it is not public in the sense that the public has a right to just march in and start demonstrating or hanging signs up in her office. Someplace in the middle of those two extremes are the fora which the city chooses to open for particular purposes. A good example is the redevelopment agency having opened the Pardee site as a public forum for limited purposes. There are some things we allow there, either simply by not regulating it or specifically with permission, and there are some things that we don't allow there. The one thing, again, that you cannot do is, having decided that you would open that forum for particular kinds of banners or particular kinds of advertisements, you can't say, I'm going to read the banner and decide whether or not this banner is good and that banner is bad because I don't like the event that the other one is advertising. Unless you're really careful about it, once you open the forum, you open it to anyone within that particular category. The category in this case is hanging banners that relate to events. We've tried to talk about community events or special events. That might be an acceptable kind of sub-criteria if we can define what we mean by that. But right now, we don't know what a special event is. We all think that that means the Mayfair, or it means some other event like that that is traditional in town, but there's no such definition anywhere. And so somebody coming in and saying they're having a crochet festival, that's going to be a special event. Somebody coming in and having a biker festival, that's a special event too. Somebody coming in and it's a group that we would all dearly hope never comes to town, but they're going to have their annual convention here, that's a special event too. And if you're going to allow people to put up banners, you're going to allow them all to put up banners. So just keep in mind when you say we're going to allow this or allow that, that the criteria are not going to involve reading the sign to figure out whether you like the folks who are putting it up or you like what they are advertising or what they are saying. I agree with the comments that you cannot have the community development director or the council, for that matter, as the decider of whether or not a particular sign is permitted or not permitted. Your ordinance has to be objective enough so that anybody can read it and figure out whether or not a given sign is okay or it's not okay. So the community development director and I had a conversation about professionally manufactured signs. That was one of the reasons why we had that conversation, was trying to decide the grease pencil question that was mentioned earlier. What does that mean, that it's professionally manufactured? Those kinds of vague terms, those kinds of subjective terms will get us into a lot of trouble. So those are just sort of general comments for what we need to look at as you go through and decide what you want to do. And I would just close with the observation that your sign ordinance is very old, that First Amendment jurisprudence has moved a long way in the last 50 years, and this sign ordinance has not moved. So we're tinkering around the edges. There's lots of places where someone could challenge this ordinance, probably very successfully. And so, you know, either it all needs to be redone, or we need to, as the community development director is currently trying to do, we need to at least move along the path of fixing parts of it. Same could probably be true for the zoning ordinance also. So those are just sort of general things to think about as you go forward.
My understanding is that this is an attempt to go through this particular ordinance and make changes as those recommendations have come forward. This is not an all-inclusive ordinance that will be, you know, something that everybody can use. My sense is that we have made some comments. Obviously, we're not going to, well, this is the first hearing, and the recommendation that I'm sensing is that it go back for further writing and discussion. I guess, and I'm not trying to bypass any commissions or anything like this, but I'm wondering, does it need to go back? You know, what if we're the ultimate decider, if you will, to quote the former president, if we have the responsibility of enacting the ordinance, I guess for sense of let's get this thing moving forward, instead of just continually, you know, say, well, that's not it, and we never know what it is. Mm-hmm. Can we not, and would council consider having this go back to Mr. Dowswell in conjunction with the city attorney to put forward some of our recommendations and come back for another 1A reading, not a second reading, but 1 sub A reading?